Chapter 2. When the machine overtakes the motor. The tipping point where freedom becomes a trap. There is a moment in private practice that nobody warns you about. It does not arrive with a warning. There is no caution sign ahead, no obvious turning point you can point to and say, that was the day everything changed. Instead, it creeps up on you, quietly, incrementally, disguised as success. Because in many ways, it is success. The practice is growing. The diary is full. You have staff. You have overheads. You have a business that, from the outside, looks like exactly what you set out to build. But something feels wrong. You are working harder than you have ever worked. Longer hours, earlier starts, later finishes. And yet the sense of control and momentum that defined those early energized years has quietly evaporated. You feel reactive rather than proactive. You are solving the same problems day after day. The business that was supposed to give you freedom has somehow become the thing that owns your time, your weekends, and increasingly, your peace of mind. This is the moment the machine overtakes the motor, and if you have been in practice for more than a few years, there is a very reasonable chance you are living through it right now. The mechanics of the tipping point. To understand what is happening, let us return to our two cogs. In the early days, what I call the honeymoon period, the motor, you, was larger than the machine, your business. Your energy, expertise, and effort were more than sufficient to drive the practice forward. The cogs meshed cleanly. Effort produced output. The system worked, and it worked well. But businesses do not stay small. They grow. And as yours grew, more patients, more staff, more locations perhaps, more administration, more marketing, more invoices, higher taxes, the machine grew with it. Slowly at first, then faster, and at some point the machine became larger than the motor. This is the tipping point, and it changes everything about how the two cogs interact. When the machine is larger than the motor, the dynamic reverses. Instead of the motor driving the machine begins to exert force back on the motor. The larger cog pulls the smaller one. The business starts to drive you rather than the other way around. And the harder you push, working longer hours, taking on more personally, refusing to delegate, the greater the friction becomes. In mechanical terms, you are asking a small motor to drive a large machine with no gearing system in place to manage the load. The motor does not fail immediately. It compensates, it pushes harder, it runs hotter, but without intervention, the outcome is entirely predictable. The motor burns out. Because the tipping point arrives gradually, many practice owners do not recognize it for what it is. They experience the symptoms, exhaustion, overwhelm, resentment, financial anxiety, without understanding the underlying cause. They blame themselves. They work harder. They double down on effort when what the situation actually requires is a structural change. Let us name the symptoms clearly, because there is a good chance you will recognize yourself in more than a few of them. The diary controls you. In the honeymoon period, you felt in command of your schedule. You decided how many patients to see, when to take time off, and how to structure your week. Now, the diary feels like it runs you. Cancellations create a spike of anxiety because you are watching revenue. Gaps feel like failure. Double bookings feel like the only way to keep up with demand. You cannot remember the last time you took a full week's leave without checking your phone, or without the faint dread that something will go wrong in your absence. For healthcare practitioners, this pressure presents in a uniquely relentless way. The hands-on, appointment-driven, and physically demanding nature of clinical work creates an upper limit on how many patients can be seen in a day. When patient demand exceeds that limit, the strain becomes personal. You start resenting the patient who keeps you running 10 minutes late, and the next patient who's checking their watch and looking disapprovingly due to your lack of time control. That patient that phones to cancel 10 minutes before their appointment, especially when you've been trying to find a gap to treat a family friend who you now have to see after hours. You dread the Monday morning answer phone cancellations and scramble to fill the gaps so your week doesn't start on a poor financial footing. Your diary, or should I say the patients in it, have become your new demanding boss. Administration has become your second job. If patient record keeping wasn't bad enough, no one told you how the paperwork, bookkeeping, staff rotas, HR compliance, invoicing and bills would consume you. Most practice owners handle this by borrowing time from their personal life. Administration gets done in the evenings and weekends. Sacrificing precious family time for paperwork and payroll has become the part-time job you don't get paid for. The boundary between work and life dissolves so gradually that you barely notice it happening, until one day you realize you cannot remember the last evening you spent without a laptop or scrolling through emails on a Sunday morning when you're supposed to be watching your kid play football. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from this kind of work. It is not the satisfying tiredness of a productive clinical day. It is a duller, more corrosive fatigue, the fatigue of someone who never fully switches off, who can never quite locate the boundary between work time and home time, who has begun to feel that the business is always unfinished, always waiting, always requiring your time. Managing staff is stressful. You took on staff because you needed to. There was more demand than one pair of hands could manage, and growing the team felt like the only solution. And it was. But nobody fully prepared you for what managing people actually involves: the associate who has excellent clinical skills but a persistent difficulty with timekeeping, the receptionist who is warm and wonderful with patients but struggles to manage the diary without close supervision, the newly qualified practitioner who keeps raising questions about their hours or holiday allowance. What makes this particularly difficult is the intimacy of a small practice environment. You are not managing anonymous employees in a large organization. You are managing people you see every day, people whose personal circumstances you know, people who may also be your friends. Staff management in a small practice often falls entirely on the owner because there is no HR department, no practice manager with a background in personnel, and no documented framework to work to. Every staff issue lands on your desk, and you're the one who needs to handle it with care, compassion, and the legal judgment of an employment lawyer. Where is all the money going? Revenue is coming in, that much you know. But do you know your exact cost per patient? Your revenue per practitioner, per room, per hour? Your net profit margin after all costs are properly accounted for? Is the practice actually generating the return on investment that justifies the hours and the risk you are putting into it? Many practice owners at this stage have a vague sense of the financial picture. They know that money is moving through the business, that the bills are being paid, that there is something left over at the end of the month, but not the clarity to make confident strategic decisions. Investing in new equipment, taking on additional practitioners, moving to larger premises, restructuring your fee schedule, all of these decisions get made on instinct and anxiety rather than data, because the financial systems to support better decision-making have never been built. This financial fog is stressful in a way that is hard to articulate to people outside private practice. It is not the clean stress of knowing you have a problem and understanding what to do about it. It is the murkier, more unsettling stress of uncertainty, of not quite knowing whether you are doing well or merely surviving, of making major decisions with incomplete information, of lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering whether the business is as healthy as it appears from the outside. Where have all the patients gone? In the early days, word of mouth did most of your marketing for you. Your reputation as a skilled practitioner spread through the local community. Referrals came in from GPs and specialists who knew you, your skills, and the practice grew organically. It was almost effortless, or at least it felt that way, because the effort was simply being good at what you did. But word of mouth has a natural ceiling, and you hit it some time ago. The pool of people who know someone who knows you is finite. growth through reputation alone plateaus. And at some point, often without a clear moment you can identify, the new patient numbers began to flatten. You know you need to do something more deliberate, a better website, a more consistent social media presence, a structured approach to referrer relationships, a strategy for building and managing online reviews, a way of articulating what makes your practice different from the clinic 2 streets away. But every time you sit down to work on any of it, something more urgent pulls you away. A last-minute patient, a staff issue, an equipment breakdown, a compliance deadline, and the marketing slides to the bottom of the list. Weeks become months. The plateau continues, and quietly, in the background, a newer practice with better systems and a more visible online presence begins to absorb the patients who might otherwise have come to you. Treat, sleep, repeat. There is a phrase I use when I talk to private practitioners who have hit the tipping point. It captures the rhythm of their days with uncomfortable precision. Treat, sleep, repeat. Wake up, treat patients all day, manage the crises that arise between appointments, handle the administration in whatever time is left over, drive home exhausted, try to eat dinner without checking your phone. Sleep, if you can, with a mind still running through tomorrow's patient list, the staff issue you need to address, the invoice that has not been paid, the email you forgot to send. Wake up and do it again. There is no time in this cycle to think strategically. There is no space to work on the business rather than in it. There is certainly no time or mental energy to build the systems that could break the cycle, because building systems requires exactly the kind of focused, unhurried attention that the treat, sleep, repeat cycle makes almost impossible. This is the trap at the heart of the tipping point. The solution requires time and headspace you do not have. And the reason you do not have that time and headspace is precisely because you have not yet implemented the solution. It is a loop. It closes on itself. Left unaddressed, it tightens. The emotional toll. The tipping point is not just a business problem. It is a profoundly personal one. The practice owner who built their clinic on a foundation of clinical passion, professional pride, and the desire for autonomy finds themselves at this stage feeling things they never anticipated. Resentment toward patients who cancel at the last minute. Irritation at staff who do not seem to care as much as they do. A simmering frustration at the gap between the practice they imagined and the one they are actually running. And, perhaps most troubling of all, a creeping ambivalence toward the profession itself. Your profession drew you in because you loved it. You loved the clinical challenge, the problem solving, the relationship with patients over time, the visible and tangible impact of your work on people's health, their comfort, their quality of life. There is something deeply satisfying about being the person who makes a positive impact on another. That satisfaction was, and perhaps still is, your identity. Your profession is the person you are. But when you are seeing back-to-back patients from 8 in the morning until 6 at night, managing 3 staff members' concerns during your lunch break, processing invoices at 10 o'clock in the evening, and waking at 4 in the morning with a mind that cannot stop cataloging everything that needs to be done, that foundational love begins to erode. It does not disappear, not at first, but it dims. The thing that once energized you starts to feel like just another demand on a list that is already too long. This erosion is one of the great unspoken crises of private practice ownership. Burnout in healthcare is well documented and widely discussed. Burnout in private practice owners who carry the additional weight of business responsibility, financial risk, and staff management on top of their clinical demands is less acknowledged, but arguably more acute and certainly more complex to address. There is also a particular kind of loneliness in this experience. As a practice owner, you are, in the most literal sense, the boss. There is nobody above you in the hierarchy to escalate a problem to. Nobody whose job it is to support you when things become unmanageable. The GP who works as a salaried partner in an NHS practice can raise a concern with their practice manager, their clinical lead, their governing body. You have none of those structures. When it is hard, you absorb it. When it is overwhelming, you push through. And you do so largely in private because the expectation, internal as much as external, is that the person who built the business should be able to handle it. The irony is savage. You left employment to escape the constraints of working for someone else. You built a practice that gave you clinical freedom, financial upside, and professional independence, and now you find yourself more constrained, more exhausted, and less free than you were as an employed clinician. The business you built to liberate you has become its own kind of cage. Why working harder is not the answer. The instinctive response to the tipping point is to push harder, to work longer hours, to take on more personally, to be the last one to leave and the first one to arrive, to tell yourself that this is just a phase, that things will ease up after the busy period, that once you get through this particular crunch, everything will settle down. This instinct is entirely understandable. It is also mechanically wrong. When a small motor is struggling to drive a large machine, the solution is not to run the motor harder. Running the motor harder accelerates wear. It generates more heat. It brings the point of failure closer, not further away. The motor does not need more effort. It needs better engineering. It needs a gearing system, something that translates the motor's existing output into a force that the machine can use without the motor bearing the entire load directly. In business terms, the solution to the tipping point is not more effort from the owner. It is a system that distributes and manages that effort intelligently, one that allows the practice to generate consistent, high-quality outcomes without being entirely dependent on the owner's personal presence, personal judgment, and personal attention for every single decision and task. This is the insight at the heart of this book, and it is the insight that the vast majority of practice owners who remain stuck at the tipping point never fully grasp. They keep running the motor harder, wondering why the machine keeps grinding. They interpret the grinding as a sign that they need to push more, give more, sacrifice more, when in fact the grinding is telling them something quite different. It is telling them that the machine needs better gearing, not a hotter motor. The minority who break through, in my experience, a smaller group than it should be, do something different. They stop, they step back, they look honestly at the structure of what they have built, and they begin the work of building the gearing system. In the succeeding chapters of this book, we will explore exactly what that gearing system looks like, how it works, and, most importantly, how you can build it for your own practice, 1 hour at a time. But before we get there, we need to spend one more chapter in the problem, because there is a psychological dimension to the tipping point that goes beyond mechanics, a deeper reason why practice owners stay stuck even when they can see the solution clearly. It has to do with the very reason most of us entered private practice in the first place. It has to do with freedom. Coming up in Chapter 3, the freedom paradox. You left employment to be free, so why do you feel more trapped than ever? In Chapter 3, we explore the psychological roots of private practice ownership, and why the same independence that drove you to build your clinic may be the very thing keeping you stuck inside it. To be the first to know when the next chapter is released, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Practice Autopilot, or subscribe to our newsletter at practiceautopilot.co.uk. Thank you for listening.